Okay, hello students. My name is Mr. John Egole. Alright, so today our topic is common errors in the use of English. So I would wish to begin by noting that language is the medium by which humans communicate ideas or feelings or thoughts. So, as a matter of fact, language is that tool that humans use to bridge whatever communication or linguistic barrier amongst them. So, it is that distinctive feature that differentiates humans from other mammal creatures. It is, of course, only humans that make use of language. And so that is why it is said that one of the features of language is that language is species specific. So what this implies is that it is only the human species that uses language for communication. So, as a matter of fact, to use the language effectively, and in this case, English language, it will be important that one understands or masters the conventions or the rudiments or the rules that guide the use of that language. Any deviation from such set conventions would, create some erroneous expressions. So, being that English is our language of communication, our language of education and business, of course, our official language, it is imperative, therefore, as students, that we master the rules of English language to effectively use that language in a standard form. Error, however, has to do with a form of deviation from a particular set or standard way of making an expression or using an English language. So, any deviation from a set standard of the use of English would always insinuate or connote error. So, error is of course different from mistake. While mistake could imply one's perhaps little deviation from or inadvertent deviation from the standard, but error has to do with a persistent or consistent deviation from that set standard. In fact, error has to do with one's ignorance of one's lack of knowledge. So often people make expressions or use words without knowing that those expressions or usages are of course wrong, but to them those expressions would be considered as being right. So if such error or deviation rather becomes consistent and recurrent to a particular person, it becomes an error. So, well, as second language users of the English, there are indeed certain factors that could necessitate the errors we always encounter in our use of the English language in our daily communication. Central to these factors is indeed what would we consider as the mother tongue interference. This has to do with the situation or moment when a native speaker, perhaps an Igbo speaker of English, allows his Igbo linguistic background to interfere in his use of the English language, a situation where his use of the English is being conditioned by the pattern or grammatical structure of his Igbo language. So, at this moment, such a person could do a form of a kind of word for word translation of the Igbo into the English without realizing, of course, that there may hardly be any two different languages that would be clearly similar in their grammatical structure. So, for an Igbo speaker of English, when he says, for example, anaghị m anụ ihe ị na-ekwu, anaghị m anụ ihe ị na-ekwu. Now, if he wants to translate this Igbo expression in the English, he would, of course, have I am not hearing you. We are not hearing you. So to him, that expression is correct. But in the normal standard usage of the English, such expression becomes erroneous. So the fact is that he has allowed the pattern of his Igbo background to affect his usage of the English version of that expression. And so it is indeed erroneous to say, I am not hearing you, or we are not hearing you. Rather, the person can say, I can't hear you, or we can't hear you. So you see that it is indeed erroneous to have an expression like I am not hearing you. But just as I've noted, to an Igbo speaker of English, that expression may be right to him because it is exactly the way his Igbo linguistic background would permit that kind of expression. But then it is because he allows his Igbo linguistic background to interfere in the way now he would present that English version of that expression. That is what we regard as mother tongue interference. So there are, of course, some other instances. If you consider when somebody would say, an Igbo person example again would say, ị na-anụ isi nri ahụ? Ị na-anụ nsi nri ahụ? So that means if you translate this also in English version or variation, word for word, you would have, of course, can you hear the smell of the food, or can you hear rather the aroma of the food? So it is, of course, also erroneous to make such expressions, but this is because the Igbo speaker of English would find its representation in his Igbo background, in that form. But however, it is indeed wrong. So the appropriate or standard expression would be, can you perceive the aroma of the food? So that is for mother tongue interference. So you see how the mother tongue interference can also facilitate some of the errors one encounters while using English language. So again, another factor that may also affect or necessitate our the common errors we encounter is the problem of orthography. Orthography, of course, it has to do with the spelling pattern of any language, the spelling pattern of any language. So you know that for every language, that is indeed a peculiar spelling pattern. So generally, however, words are being spelled primarily based on the sound system or structure that they have. So what this means is that often you would remember that one could say that the spelling of a particular word is spelled as pronounced. So spelled as pronounced means that the sound or the sound system that the word produces could help to ensure its spelling. But for English language, of course, we also discover that part of the problem people will have in the use of that English, especially in writing, is that this language English would not always adhere to that patterned structure of spelling based on the sound. So there are different instances where words are not spelled based on the sound that they create. So that is why to an Igbo user of English also, you discover that certain words may become problematic for him to spell. For instance, consider such words like pneumonia. Now you discover, and you must be honest, that to a lay Igbo man, if you ask him to spell pneumonia, by his knowledge of his Igbo background, he may begin the spelling from or with N, whereas that is not, the right thing. So the spelling of pneumonia, of course, is Pneumonia, pneumonia. But you discover that in that spelling or in that word, the P there is silent. So why would Igbo man who is spelling this word, have this headache of identifying the P that is silent there? So, but that is of course the nature of English, and that also indicates that language, which is one of the features of language, that language is arbitrary. It changes. It is not static. What is obtainable in a particular place must not be obtainable at another point. So, pneumonia would, of course, pose maybe some challenges to some Igbo users of English. There are, of course, certain other words like psychology. The P there is also silent. There is also other words like asthma. There are other words like psychiatry, like psalm we read in the Bible, like phlegm, and the phlegm I mean here is not Flame, it is Phlegm. The phlegm, when you cough, what you cough out is known as phlegm. And so to an ordinary Igbo person, and of course to a larger percentage of the students, that word may also pose some challenges in its spelling, because ordinarily the person would or may pronounce that word as phlegm, whereas the G there is silent. So there are also other words that could pose such or challenges. So observe, that some letters in some of these words would become silent. So in the pronunciation of those words, but in their writing, they become conspicuous. So another issue with the problem of orthography, which is spelling, has to do with the replication of certain letters in a word. This can also cause some problem while writing the English language. So you discover that For some words, we have duplication of a particular letter or some letters in that word. So, and it will certainly become an issue to an ordinary Igbo person or a second language use of that English of the English language. For instance, some words like accommodation, you ask indeed, why would there be double C and double M? Why wouldn't there be double D, for instance? And so the issue is that language is arbitrary, it is not static. So that is the nature of the English language. And at this point, you will believe with me that that spelling accommodation to an average student, it can also cause some challenges. It could be whether to put the double letter in C or M. Sometimes there would be such confusion. Then again, we have those words like occasion, and this is indeed would I say intriguing or very tricky now. Yes, you discover that at a point one may have a problem of identifying the appropriate place we have this replication, whether it is in the C or whether it is in the S, or even whether it is in the C and S, just as we had in accommodation C and M. And so one may have the temptation of writing occasion as OCCASSION or OCASSION. So the fact is that the correct spelling would be OCCASION. So at this point, this can also create some challenge where we have the replication or duplication of the letter. Then another word that may also have this challenge is committee. And in committee you discover that we have double M, double T and double E. So this can also become a problem or pose a challenge to some students or second English language users. There are indeed other examples like questionnaire, like bizarre, like addendum, curriculum, ammunition, like colossal. These are different cases of words that have some of their letters being duplicated, and so in their writing they could indeed confuse the user of that language. So another issue of course we have with the orthography problem of English is in some cases where people tend to misrepresent or misspell some words. For instance, in the word or expression on that fateful day, you discover that many people may tend to write the faithful as FAITHFUL rather than or instead of FATEFUL. So in this case, it is a problem of writing. And the fact is that some of the errors we encounter in the use of English are indeed speech bound. That is, they occur most or more in our daily speech activities, spoken expressions, while some are, of course, writing oriented. They are domiciled in our writing activities. So these ones, of course, are found mostly in our writing activities. Someone could want to write grateful as in I am very grateful, and you see that the spelling of the grateful would be Greatful instead of Grateful. So these and many other instances are situations where we have some spelling problems with the English language. And of course, there are also cases like when you talk about, you hear students say pronunciation instead of pronunciation. There is of course no word like pronunciation, but we have pronunciation. There are also other areas like you hear students often say expatiate. Sir, please, can you expatiate? There is no word like expatiate. That word is expatiate. And again, students would say postponed. The meeting, the exam, the test, the quiz have been postponed instead of has been postponed. So there are many other examples. Okay, yes, this one strikes me like often you hear people say, that boy is so corny, he's so corny. So but of course there is nowhere like corny, Cunny. The word is cunning. When somebody is tricky, cunning, double N ing, that is cunning. Then again, we don't have expressions or words like what do you call it now? Okay, insultive. We hear people say you are very insultive. Rather, what we have is insulting. So it's either you say the person is insulting and not that the person is insultive. Okay, so these some of the issues. Then a very, very prominent one again is covenant. There is no word like covenant. The word is covenant. Covenant, an agreement. Covenant. Often we hear this, even in our churches, we keep hearing your covenant with God. No, it is your covenant with God. So, another factor, however, that also would create or pose some of these challenges in our communication or usage of the English is because of the problem of borrowed words. So, as a matter of fact, English language has indeed borrowed some of its words from other languages, and the fact that those words has to be used in the English language based on their background in terms of spelling or pronunciation. You discover, for instance, that words that are borrowed, for example, from French, you discover that a speaker, a second user of English who is not familiar with the French language or words would also find it difficult to use those French English words of French background. So whether in their spelling or in their pronunciation, they will certainly, pose some challenges. So these are some of the factors that cause or necessitate the common errors we encounter. And so let us also now consider some of these errors and at points or which points where we normally encounter them. One is the misuse of concord. you of course would know that concord is the agreement between the subject of a sentence and the verb of that same sentence. What this implies is that if the subject of a sentence is in singular form, the verb must be in the singular form. Any contrary to this would therefore become an erroneous expression. So it is important that a student masters his grammatical structures to also effectively apply those his use of the English to ensure standardness. So expressions like they goes to school would indeed become erroneous because the the subject there would not agree with the verb goes, while the subject there is a plural noun. The verb goes is a singular verb, and so there is no agreement. But if you say they go to school every day, then there is agreement between the subject of that sentence and the verb because they are all in the plural forms. So now there are this of course is the primary rule of the concord. There are other cases which could be very confusing where we have expressions like together with. So in expressions like the president together with his aides dash invited to a party. So you discover that in such expressions, what we normally do is to do some elimination. We eliminate from together with until the place we have the verb. And so if you eliminate together with until the place we have the verb, what would therefore be left at is the president dash invited. So of course, you now see that it becomes the president was invited. It will be was because the invited, which is the main verb there, is already in the past tense. And so, but if you had considered that expression as a whole, the way it was, the president together with his heirs dash invited. Because of the heirs, you may think that it should be we are invited, but in this case, just simply do the elimination method, and whatever is left at informs what should be the verb of that sentence. And so, if we then put or add s to the president and therefore have the presidents together with their aides dash invited, the same elimination method will leave us with the presidents dash invited, and since now it is presidents, it therefore becomes where invited. And so that is another form of the concord. Another area of the concord that can also create some challenges, which also would adopt the elimination method, is the places we have expressions like neither this nor that, or either this or that. And so in such expressions, we also go by some elimination method. In this case, we eliminate from the beginning of the sentence until the no or until the or. So if you have, for instance, neither you nor I dash to blame, neither you nor I dash to blame, you will believe with me that in that sentence, as complete as it is, one may be tempted to say neither you nor I is to blame, neither you nor I is to blame. However correct or right it sounds to your ear, the truth is that it is indeed erroneous. So to get the appropriate verb that will be there. You have to eliminate the beginning part of that sentence from neither, from the beginning till no. And so if you eliminate those parts, that part, you simply have I dash to blame. And you see, therefore, that one cannot say I is to blame. So you therefore have I am to blame. So that is the rule of the concord in this regard. The same thing applies to either you or I is to blame. But you can also have, okay, neither I nor you. This one becomes, if you eliminate, you still have you are to blame. And so we have neither I nor you are to blame. So that is another form or rule, a form of the concord that may also create some issues. So there is also another aspect where we have the high time expressions. For instance, if one says it is high time you dash to school, it is high time you dash your food, it is high time you dash the exam. The appropriate options would be it is high time you went to school, it is high time you ate your food, it is high time you passed your examination. The fact also in this case is that it may not sound correct or appropriate in your ear, but indeed it is. So any moment you have high time expressions, automatically the verb that must follow must be in the past tense. The verb that must follow must certainly be in the past tense for high time expressions. So okay, and that is the for the concord aspect. So there are indeed some other areas where we also encounter some of these common errors in our daily use of English. We can also have that in what we identify as redundant expressions. Often we make redundant statements or expressions where perhaps a particular word that we have used becomes unnecessary. If you consider some examples like enter, you discover that that word enter would not accept any other word like in or into in most expressions, like enter into the house, enter inside the car. Those expressions would of course become redundant because of the use of those in or into or inside. The fact remains that in the word enter, it is already conceived to have in or insideness in it, and so there is no need to repeat those words like in, into or inside again. So we therefore would have enter the house, enter the car, enter the class, and stuffs like that. So we also have issues like or examples like discourse. You actually do not have to discuss about anything, you simply have to discuss something. So the expression what are you discussing about would of course become redundant and consequently erroneous to say, but we can say what are you discussing, what are you discussing, because to discuss means to talk about and therefore would not require another about beside it. So there are other examples that I'm sure you would find in your textbook. So another area that we also encounter errors in our daily use of English is what we also can identify as confusable pairs. Confusable pairs. Now, in English, however, there are certain sets of words that may seem quite very similar in their usage or meaning, often or sometimes in their spelling, that can actually confuse us, that can actually trick us. So, if we are not careful, we misplace those words wrongly. And so, it will be important we pay attention to always know the particular word we are choosing from those pairs. They can always confuse, and that is why we identify them as confusable pairs. Now, one of those sets of pairs is the two words like school and attend. School and attend. And in this case, we are using the word school to function as a verb. And so often you discover that students could say, I schooled in Unizik. I schooled in Unizik. And this expression is used to just imply that the person attended Unizik. So, what would stop this person from saying, I attended Unizik? Must that person say, I schooled in Unizik? So, the fact is that to simply disambiguate that problem or error there, you simply you simply have to you simply have to know that to school means to teach. To school means to teach. Therefore, if you say you schooled in Unizik, it simply means you taught in Unizik. But you either should say you attended Unizik, or if you must still use school, then you can say you were schooled in Unizik. I was schooled in Unizik, meaning I was taught in Unizik. So let us also always be careful with the way we use those pairs. They may not actually mean what we have in mind. So another of those pairs that can cause us problem are these two words, borrow and lend. Borrow and lend. Indeed, almost everybody makes this mistake, new or erroneous expression. When we say borrow, borrow means to collect from somebody with the intention to pay back, while lend means to give to somebody with the intention to collect back. And so if you say, give me the money I borrowed you, it is indeed wrong, because you didn't borrow anybody money by giving the person money. You lent the money by giving. And so if you are collecting your money, but it is, give me the money I lent you, or if you are the one that borrowed, then it is, I will give you the money I borrowed from you. So let us always be attentive in our use of these pairs in a way that they don't keep confusing us. So from today, let us know the appropriate meaning of borrow and lend. Then another of those pairs are these two words, stationary and stationary. The first stationary is stationary. The second one is stationery. Now, they have the same sound. The difference, almost the same spelling. The only difference is the ARY and ERY. So, why the ARY variation means something to be static, immobile, the ERY means something like writing materials. So one could say that the truck is stationary while school has resumed. The kids would need some stationery. So using stationery, and the fact is that it becomes erroneous now, especially when we are writing. When you want to imply stationery as writing material, you use the spelling of Stationary. It is indeed an error because the reader would of course get a different meaning from what you have intended to use or express. So there are indeed other elements of these confusable pairs, like in time and on time. We should know that in time has to do with being at a particular place much earlier than required, while on time means being there at the exact moment. So for instance, I have not mastered my terrains here, so I need to be there in time to study the environment. It is different from I have to be there on time. Then another one is each other and the one another. Each other has to do with two people being involved. One another has to do with more than two people. So the couple love each other while the couples love one another. So then we also have issues with between and among. You discover that people use these words randomly even without knowing their appropriate places of usage. We use between, just as we said in each other. We use between when it concerns only two people, and we use among when it concerns more than two people. So there are other pairs of such nature that can always confuse us. Then another area we may have this problem is in the prepositional errors. So often we discover that we use prepositions wrongly, and they would indeed become erroneous. For instance, if one says, sir, why didn't you come with your car today? Why didn't you come with your car? Nobody goes to an event with their cars because car is not human being you go with, but it is why didn't you come in your car? So rather than saying with your car, you say in your car. So that is one. Another area of this prepositional problem is the expression we always make, like what goes around comes around. I have no doubt indeed that this expression is also erroneous, because the appropriate expression should be what goes round comes around. What goes round comes around. If you just picture it in a situation where maybe in a round table and people are taking something from a particular source and passing by, so you discover that that same source would go round and still come back to the first person. So it goes round and yet comes around to everybody. So what goes round comes around. Then again, we always hear expressions like the man is not in school today, he went to a burial. I also strongly doubt that expression, because burial is not a place or location that people go to. It is indeed an event. So people go to places but go for events. So the appropriate expression would have been he went for burial and not he went to a burial. So there are indeed some other examples of this misplacement of the prepositions. So another area we also encounter problem or errors in our use of the English, but in this case now more in our writing, is in the punctuation displacement. Now, of course, we know that punctuation marks are those elements or signs or symbols that the writer uses to guide the reader. So the way the people read an expression or writing is dependent upon the writer's deployment of punctuation marks. So we may sample just three of them. Now the comma is a very important punctuation mark. Now you discover that comma can indeed distort, or its presence or absence or omission can indeed distort an intended message. So if you consider two examples like slow machine at work, slow machine at work, and the second example is slow comma machine at work, you discover that those two expressions rather, are made up of these same words at same positions. The only difference is the use of the comma in the second one, and that comma there changes the meaning of that expression from what it should be originally to what it is now intended in the second one. So while the first expression means that the machine working there is slow, slow machine at work, the second example, slow comma machine at work, is now indeed a kind of warning or instruction that the driver should slow down because there is machine at work. And so you discover that if the writer intended this kind of warning or instruction implied in the second one, but first to put the comma, omits the comma and writes it in the form of the first expression, which therefore passes the message that the machine working is slow, and then the driver speeds up the more, you know of course that the next thing that may occur would be accident. So it is important we place our punctuation marks appropriately to help us communicate or convey our intended messages effectively. Alright, so then we also have expressions where you could say, okay, what is your name? Now consider these examples. What is your name? Oh my God, what a day. And then please, may I sit with you? The first one is a question, what is your name? The second one, oh my God, what a day, is indeed never a question, but it is an outburst of the speaker's emotion, and therefore, while the first one takes question mark, the second one will take exclamation mark. But the third one, may I sit with you, or please may I sit with you, is also never a question, even though that if you are not careful, you may even misconceive it to be a question. So the third expression will just take a simple full stop. So it is what a type of sentence we call imperative sentence that asks makes a request. And so in the third expression, please may I sit with you, the speaker is not actually asking a question, and therefore there shouldn't be a question mark. Rather, the speaker is making a polite request, and so would simply put a full stop at the end of that expression. So there are other problems or issues with the punctuation mark. So for example, we have hyphen. We discover that students don't always use the hyphen in its appropriate way. Primarily, we know we can use a hyphen to join words together and form a new word like ex-president, mother-in-law, editor-in-chief. So all those expressions. But also there are other places or another place where we can use the hyphen, which will always become a challenge to students. A situation where we use a hyphen to match to merge a word that cannot contain at the end of a particular margin, we put hyphen to complete it at the next line. But you discover that at this point students use that expression haphazardly on in unorganized form. However, let me point out that Hyphen in this sense and case is used based on the syllabic breakage of a word, not anyhow you wish you put it. You must consider the syllabic breakage of a particular word. That is how you put the hyphen appropriately. So there are the examples like, okay, let's say something like communication, communication, education, education, accommodation. So the way we break those words in syllabic form is the same way we apply the hyphen. So we use hyphen to break words, so and we have to observe that syllabic structure or that syllabic breakage of the word. So these are some other are some places or areas we encounter problems in our daily use of the English language. And as I noted earlier, these errors may occur in our writing, and these errors may also occur in our spoken expressions. So it is important that we pay attention and master some of these rules so that we use the language appropriately and in standard form. However, I would advise that the best way to master these things is by being a voracious or ardent reader. For instance, in the spelling problems, you discover that it is or it may be a general issue. There is no way to learn spelling of words, especially in English, rather than by studying hard. Reading hard, it makes us to become conversant with most of these words that will become or pose some challenges to us. So, well, I hope we understand what we have been trying to explain so far. So common errors in the use of English. There are those errors that we encounter daily in our use of English. So because the language is not our native language, we are bound to have some challenges, but these challenges of course would have remedy, and the remedy is by our constant studying or reading. That is the only way we can always avert these errors. And again, it is important that we also from time to time study our dictionary, because that is the best way to learn the spelling of words and even the sound system of those words, and then even the etymology or origin of those words.